You're in for another great episode of the podcast, but first, do me a favor and click that subscribe button below, and let's dive in. Kasey Compton, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
You're one of a few guests that I last minute ask if it's okay to record video. And it's like a litmus test maybe for people who are like adapt to change easily. Because I'm like, oh, by the way, can you turn your camera on and we can record this, put it on YouTube? And you're like, yeah, sure, it's fine.
Yeah, at least I'm not in my pajamas or, but yeah, I don't care.
You're rocking your own brand shirt. I love that.
I am. Thank you. I love it. I told my director of details this morning. I sent her a text and I was like, I think I've grown out of my shirt. Can you put me another size back, please? Because I just keep washing it and shrinking it so it gets softer and softer and it just gets smaller and smaller. So.
She's gonna start charging you extra for your own
Yeah,
shirts.
I know.
So, I got to hang out with you in person, which is also feels like more rare in my life these days, given that so many of my friendships and like colleagues are online. So you and I got to hang out at Slow Down School. That was the first time I got to meet you. But tell people a little bit about kind of who you are and how you got here. And yeah.
Okay. Well, of course, you already told them my name, Kasey, and I've been practicing as a therapist since 2009, and I knew right going into it that I was going to open a practice and really dive into the business side of things. And so a few years after I got my license, I started a private practice, followed Joe with Practice of the Practice quite a bit, read all of the articles I could read and just really tried to get my footing, and did really well in private practice and decided I wanted some residual income, and I didn't really want to be, it was just that kind of that fear of, oh crap, like what if something happens to me and I can't work, that really drove me to decide to scale. And so from there, I rented a larger office and started scaling my practice. And so it's called Mindset Behavioral Group, and right now we have 6 office locations. We're in about 17 counties in Kentucky, and we've scaled it from October of 2015 to this year. I think we have right at about 80 employees. So it's actually kind of taken on a life of its own in a lot of ways. And so right now, I run that, and probably about 9 months ago, I started doing some individual type consulting with other business owners, and so I'm doing that some too, and that's kind of me in a nutshell.
When you started scaling, what did you envision?
Well, honestly, I mean, I could make something up and like tell you this big, beautiful story, but I don't know that I ever really thought it out to the point of like ultimately what is this going to look like. I just knew how I wanted to set it up, and I knew that I'm a pretty analytical type A type person in a lot of ways, and then in a lot of ways I'm not. But in those ways in business, I knew that I needed to make it strong, and because I guess I kind of felt like if it was strong, if my infrastructure was strong, it didn't really matter what direction it went. And that's kind of what happened. So I didn't really have an idea. It's not like I said I want 100 employees, because that really wasn't it at all. We just kind of keep growing to meet the needs of the community, and whether that be 50 or 100, I feel like my company can support that either way we go now.
How did you establish that structure early on, and how did you know that it would be scalable?
Early on, I kept thinking about it in terms of scaling. So every time that we would implement something new, like an onboarding process or an intake process or anything, I would just kind of play devil's advocate with myself and say, how would I do this if we were 3 times larger right now? Like, how would that affect me if we had 100 people call today for appointments? So I set it up really to grow into rather than grow out of. And I think that really helped because I think a lot of times as practice owners or just business owners in general, we just do what we can with what we've got. And we don't really think, oh, I'm going to end up spending more money in 6 months when I grow out of this space, or you know what I mean? So I just set it up to grow into it.
How did you come to that philosophy, I guess, growing into versus growing out of?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know if it just comes from my personality of I like change. I like to improve things. I don't really like to stay stagnant. I'm always looking at how can I make this better? How can I do this faster? Um, Maybe it's that. I
Hmm.
really try not to be that way in my business, or at least use those qualities in a good way and not like in a neurotic, crazy way. Um, so I don't really know. I guess probably that's what it was because of.
How did you and how do you continue to manage growing at the right rate? Because another thing
Mm.
that I see a lot of therapists doing, and I end up warning heavily against, is therapists who um, they grow too fast in the sense that um, they rent out a suite of 6 offices
Hmm.
when they only have one clinician, when they don't have a plan, when they don't have the
Yeah.
referrals coming in. Essentially, they grow too fast with their overhead, and the
Hmm.
revenue is disproportionate to that growth, and then they're in a real hole,
Yeah.
and they're in a panic, and it means it
Yeah.
puts their marketing in a panic, and they didn't have the system. So, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
How do you manage that, making sure you're not overdoing it?
I think you said a good word there, and it was the P word, the plan. So if you have the plan and you have the data and you have things to back it up, I think you'll be okay. I would never advise someone that's starting out to go rent a 6 suite office. I would advise you to look at offices that you have options to grow into, or that you have a flexible lease, or you know what I'm saying,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
things like that. And that's kind of what we did. We looked for a landlord. We started with a 2 room office, and I was looking for someone that had additional property. So I didn't really want to rent from someone that just had that one. I wanted something that I could roll my lease over into. So we did that kind of 3 times with that same landlord before we ended up where we are now. So looking at things like that, and just I'm pretty conservative when it comes to the financials and just with growth in general. And um, there's just a lot of metrics that I use to determine if something's too risky or not. Um, so.
How did you know that the demand was there to keep growing?
Well, so when I was in private practice, my first month in private practice, I had 43 new clients. And that was from one referral source, one physician in our community. And I thought, holy crap, like this is just 1 month, one person. And so as I started working more and more, I mean, I was getting between 40 and 80 a month, and I couldn't keep them. And I just thought, if I can juggle this, it's not even an issue to bring on another clinician. So, and that's kind of how we do it now. I mean, we just use the market to tell us whenever it's time to hire again.
Yeah, I like that because it's not overthinking it.
Hmm.
You're using basic economics of supply and demand.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all it is. I mean, it's not rocket science. It's really
Yeah.
not. It's just,
It's not
honestly.
rocket science, but it's conscientiousness. It's being deliberate in the next step versus going, I'm gonna open my doors and hope that they come, or
Yeah.
assume that they will come, or assume that my market is there.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of times too, just I spoke with one of my individual consulting clients the other day, and she was looking at opening an office in another location, and she's not really sure. And one of the things that we do is we try to go into it building a lot of momentum. So whether that's getting out in the community, doing a blitz, like a marketing blitz, just getting people out there checking into these places, getting the word going before we go and invest in a 3-year lease on an office space. I want to know that the market's viable. And so that's just one of the things that's been successful for us.
Um, what about any mistakes that you learned from? What about me? You're making it look easy so far.
No.
I'm like, tell me about things that have not gone well, so that we can learn from you.
Yeah. Okay. So, I could write a book. I'm serious. I could write a
Yeah, I
book
think
of
you
all the
should.
things. Yeah, like all the screw ups. I actually started to write a blog about the top 10, I think, top 10 screw ups not to make in your private practice because I've done almost every single one of them. But for me, I think my screw ups came relinquishing some control at the wrong time to the wrong people. I think most of my screw ups have happened related around people. Like in the beginning, creating a culture that wasn't really what I wanted. I was letting my fears and my anxieties get into people's heads in the practice. And I didn't need to give that to them. Like those should have stayed in me. Um, so definitely that. I've learned a lot about when you get into a practice of this size, I think it becomes less about managing and operating the practice as it does about managing and operating the people.
Yeah,
It's like,
culture.
yeah, because every time you hire someone new, it's just like, oh, uh-oh, like what is this one gonna bring?
Correct.
And
Yeah. How are they going to shift the culture?
uh-huh, because it does.
Yeah.
It really does. And you can go to each one of our 6 offices and walk in, and just based on the people that work there, you're going to feel something a little different. They each
Hmm.
have their own little cultures within the big culture of the company. So making sure that all of that is in check and making sure that even though one of them might be an hour and a half from our main location, that we still help them to feel connected so that we can maintain that brand identity and not lose it in the masses. But it's definitely that most of the screw ups come down to the people, like how
Hmm.
I've managed the people, how I've not managed the people, how much trust I've put in some people, how much trust I should not have put in some people. Um, yeah, just all about that.
So knowing that, what do you believe about hiring now?
I believe that hiring should be a highly guarded, valued, protected thing. And um, it takes a little while, I think, to really know the kind of people that you need to make your practice the way you want it. And I think I figured it out. Now, that doesn't mean I don't hire the wrong people sometimes because that's just going to happen. But the way that I approach interviewing is different now. Finding key people that really reflect values or maybe just like pull out one of your personality traits that you really is a strength and hiring someone that is a reflection of that. And I've done that, and that has been like the best thing I've ever done for my practice. It's looking for people as a whole, kind of embody who I am and what I'm wanting.
And the key is getting as clear as you can on that first, so that you know who you're looking for, right? Rather than just hiring people who say they're really motivated and want to work for your practice, and then letting them basically shape the culture.
Yeah.
And then yeah. So we were talking about this the other day in one of my mastermind groups. Someone making their first hire, and the question being, do I hire someone who is kind of similar to me or complementary to me?
Mhm.
What would you
Yeah.
say to that clinician, maybe just making their first hire?
Oh gosh. Well, my first hire was complete opposite of me
Yeah.
in all the good ways. Like she was everything I was not. She was very warm and fuzzy. She was very
You
patient.
can
She
be
was
warm and fuzzy.
I can, but not like I'm very if I'm upset with you, I can't hide it. You're gonna know
Yeah.
it. If I'm happy, you're gonna know it. If I'm confused, like I'm gonna look at you really confused. I just don't hide that stuff very
Yeah.
well. And she's great. She was really great at that. So I would probably say complimentary, but I read Mike Michalowicz's book Clockwork recently, and I really liked something he said in there. He said, hire people that you respect, not
Hmm.
necessarily that you like. And that was a big one for me because I used to hire people that was very similar to me, and it never worked out well, ever. So I think there's a lot of truth to that.
I think and it mirrors other kinds of relationships in our lives, right? There's sometimes sometimes people are too similar to us for us to see, you know what I mean? And it's like if you want to look at it clinically, we can have countertransference issues with the people in our business because it's too close to home. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because we see ourselves in them at a deep level, or even at just a functional level, and that creates unnecessary complication in the workplace,
Yeah.
especially when your team's really small, right? And those
Hmm.
differences are even more felt in a
Hmm.
really small team, which is where a lot
Yeah.
of people are for some time, or indefinitely.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think that that first hire and your first 5 hires, that is going to set the tone for everything that comes after if you choose to scale. So, putting all of your like that's great that they're bouncing ideas off of you and within your group because that's just something that's hard to make those decisions on your own of what's right. It's good to have somebody that's a little more objective that can give you some feedback there.
So at a certain point, um, you go from directly managing the people that are on your team to needing to put people in between you and
Hmm.
that team or that side of things or that branch of yours.
Yeah.
Um, how do you kind of identify and work with those people so that you can truly trust that they're doing their jobs right and that culture is kind of trickling down?
Hmm. That's hard. I think that comes with some experience, and that's not something I was always good at. And I feel like I'm a little bit better at it now. I try to find a real good balance. I don't want to micromanage. I don't want people to feel controlled, but I also want them to know that they're accountable for what it is that I'm asking them to do. And I think a lot of it just comes down to respect. The team that I have now, it's taken a few years to really get to where I feel very comfortable and confident. But I know that the team that I have now has our company's best interest at heart, and they would do anything to help me if I needed it. So I think just developing that form of healthy level of respect there is huge. The training piece of it is crucial. If they get trained poorly, you might as well count on they're going to do a crappy job, and it's not their fault. So there's been times where I've let other people that really shouldn't have trained some of my staff train my staff, and then when I get ready to go have a conversation about why is this work not done, I start looking at it and I'm like, wait a minute, that's not even your fault. That was we set you up to fail here. So kind of just managing that.
That's another interesting point, right? Because well, something that I've always believed, and I used to teach college courses and teach undergraduate psychology classes, and it's this idea of like when a student fails, where does the fault lie? And
Yeah.
I tended in those situations to lean towards the fault of the teacher in some regard of not facilitating the learning or being clear about what's expected or making sure the material was clear and realistic, etc. And so maybe some of that translates to the workplace, right?
Mhm.
And at the same time, there are certain people that you just can't help or that will continue to fall short in your business, making it really hard for you to continue getting along with them or seeing them fit into the practice. And I think
Yeah.
those decisions are some of the hardest for therapists to make because we lean toward wanting to be pleasing to people, wanting to be
Mhm.
sensitive, wanting to see the best in people.
Mhm.
I've even seen this in my own hiring, is that because as therapists we're trained to really see the best in people, see the potential, I tend to not see their shortcomings right
Mhm.
off the bat. And my wife gives me a lot of grief about this because she's the polar opposite in that she's like a skeptical cat where I'm like a
Mhm.
happy puppy when it comes
Mhm.
to building
Yeah.
teams sometimes. Of like she sees all the ways it could go wrong first. She approaches everyone with a healthy sense of skepticism, kind of
Mhm.
until like kind of guilty until proven innocent.
Yeah.
Not that she's cold to people by any means, but that's sometimes having her bring that perspective is important to say, okay, yeah, they've got some good qualities. Here's some areas I'm concerned about. Let's look at those as well, or look at how we might mitigate some of them in this job.
Mhm. Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I'm guilty of that to a certain degree, and I haven't really decided if this is a strength yet. I'm trying to make it into one, but I was just talking to my HR lady this morning, and I just don't like to fire people, or I don't like it when people quit. And so, if that ever happens, I'm always thinking, how can we use your strengths somewhere else in this business? Like, what can we do? And that's exhausting. And I just find that it wears my brain out. But then I just don't know if that's something I want to let go of either, because I would rather people feel cared for, and I would rather people know that, hey, she's at least trying to figure out how to make this work, than that it's just like, sorry, on to the next. Like, that's not
Totally.
really, yeah. So
Totally.
that's tough. I mean, and I tell her all the time, I joke with her, I'm like, that's why I hired you to deal with all of that, because she's great and she's good at it and I'm not, and it just wears me out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think sometimes just giving people, if they show motivation to continue being a part of your team, but they're falling short, set some clear expectations for them,
Mhm.
and make it so that they can actually succeed, right?
Yeah.
And then reassess things after you've made some intervention or give them more support or whatever. That way you can at least reach that point and go, okay, here are the metrics or the
Mhm.
numbers that we agreed upon. And I think that's the hard part about what we do, because we are people working with people, and there's a lot of factors at play when you look at things like clinicians being able to retain their clients. We know
Mhm.
it's really important to know those numbers. At the same time, there's a lot of moving parts, and we're working with
Mhm.
human beings and people with emotional issues. But being able to at least set some sort of numbers around it, so that you
Yeah.
can make better decisions, right? And
Yeah.
maybe pull our emotions out of it a little bit when it comes to these tough decisions.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think that's the struggle, is setting the emotional piece aside, um, when it needs to be set aside.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Okay, for those who do find themselves having to fire someone, what are your tips?
Oh my gosh, I'm not good at firing people. I always have tried to hire someone to field between me and the staff in that way. Um, let me think. I don't know that I fired one person, and it was not something that I was proud of. I even said like a bad word. I was really mad. I should not have fired that person at that time. It was just like hit a nerve. It was bad. I mean, we fired people within our company, but I'm not really a good one to give advice on that. I would say defer that to someone that is really good at firing people,
Outsource
and
it.
yeah,
It's like
outsource
that
that.
movie with George Clooney or something, where he comes in just to fire people.
Oh yeah, yeah. Get him. Yeah, and I've got a
Get George
great
Clooney
HR
and let
lady.
him down softly, and then
Uh huh.
worst case
Yeah,
scenario, you're hanging out with George Clooney for the
exactly.
rest of the hour.
Yeah, I mean, he could fire me all day long. I'd be
Yeah, I'm sure.
perfectly fine with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's something to be said about the golden rule, right? And not like when you're thinking about what kind of manager you want to be, or thinking about some of these situations, really treating people how you would want to be treated, whether it's like an employee is sick or an employee just lost someone. It's like, do you want to do you want to ride them and mandate that they come back 2 days later, or
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, if just taking a minute and thinking, okay, I was once an employee, or the employee for some organization and some manager, and if I were the employee in this situation, how would I want to be treated? And try to play that card as much as you can.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for that. It does bring on an extra level of stress and drama, but then again, like, who would you be if you didn't have that?
Yeah, that's
You
true.
know, like, what kind of company would you be? Would you be such a large corporate looking company that it's just so institutionalized that no one wants to work there? I mean, so it's a compromise, I guess, that I'm willing to take as much as I possibly can, just to have the culture that we want to have.
For people who are trying to not only define their company culture, but maybe shift it, or maybe it's for those who have some culture that's gone in the wrong direction. What would you say to them, or where should they, how
Mm.
should they get on the right track?
Well, from my experience, I have had a company that I feel like was probably it did not have a great culture. It just didn't, and that was largely because I allowed people to work in certain roles that I should not have, and so I do take responsibility for that. Um, but it really got to the point that it was pretty bad. And then all of the people that were influencing that negative culture decided to leave at the same time and start their own company. And it was really scary for me because some of the people were in pretty important roles. Um, so to say the least, it was scary. And then, whenever your staff sees, 3, 4 people all at the same time leaving, people start to wonder, like, what's going
Right.
on? So I think when you have a culture that's bad, um, being really honest with yourself about what you have to do with it. What is it that you're contributing that you might need to check or reevaluate? Be honest with your team. Um, that's what we did. We had a staff meeting and we just sat down and here it is. This is what's been going on. I realize that I take responsibility for letting some of these things happen. Um, we are going to do better. Like, this is going to change. And as a result of just that openness and just being vulnerable, I tend to be pretty straight faced. Like, I'm not, like, I don't cry unless I'm mad. Like, you know what I'm saying? And I was just as open and as honest as I could be to these 60 something people at that time. It was just like, and I think that brought us all together.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't lose a single person because of that. And I feel like everyone started looking out for one another and everyone had each other's backs.
Yeah. I mean,
And
it's like any relationship when you and your partner go through something. On one hand, it can pull people apart. On the other hand, people can pull closer together when they go
yeah.
through something difficult. And ultimately, people want a sense of universality. They want togetherness. So groups of people will strive to band together as much as they can. And sometimes we have to create an environment where that can happen and where we're encouraging that. And it has a lot to do with our leadership. And in this case, you were just kind of honest about what was going on. And they really appreciated being, that honesty.
I think so too. And then at that point, I knew in my head, I was thinking, this is kind of do or die. Like, I have a really good opportunity to do something and change this however I have always dreamed that it needs to be.
Yeah.
Or I can just like go home and cry and just stick my head in the dirt, And luckily I chose the first option, and I found a really great, crazy HR lady, Laura, and she'll listen to this and she'll think she's famous. So we'll
And
make
everyone
her
else
feel
will think she's crazy because you called
yeah,
her crazy.
she is crazy in a good way.
Of course.
But she really had that personality that we needed at that time. The just very outgoing, like let me like pet your head, like let me just tell you how wonderful and beautiful you are, like, and that is what we needed. And she just kind of rallied the troops, and she did what I hired her for, and I've appreciated that. I have a lot of respect for her for how she helped me in that situation. So putting the right people in the right places is huge.
Totally.
Yeah.
I think I need one of her.
Yeah, everybody does.
Does she have some availability?
Yeah.
So you and I had planned in part to talk about, and here comes my cat. My cat always makes an appearance every time I'm doing something important. I swear to you. And people who listen to the podcast, some of them know that he's going to show up.
That's so cute.
And he can be cute. Don't let him fool you. He always shows up.
That's okay.
People are used to it. See, and then I don't know what I was saying.
You were saying that originally we were going to talk about...
We were going to talk about cats and dogs and butterflies.
Do that.
George Clooney.
Mm-hmm.
We were going to talk about profit first because it's it's a concept, it's a framework that I've talked about a little bit on the show, but I really want to go deeper into it. So that just means I'm going to have you on the show again.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I know, it's a bummer, but
do what you got to do.
And so there's going to be a profit first conversation coming up, and from there I think we might even go a little bit deeper into systems and scaling, but certainly getting right with your money and continuing to have a roadmap for your money is super, super, super critical. So I'm excited to talk to you about that again. And I know you just got to virtually meet the man himself, Michael Michalowicz.
I did. That was like the highlight of my life. Yeah, I was trying. I didn't. Well, first of all, Gordon pulled the, oh, by the way, we're going to video. And I was like, uh-oh.
So he did what I did, but I didn't have a famous author.
Right. It was different. And then so he says, he was like, because I was just going to say hi at the beginning before the podcast. And then so we get on, he's like, why don't you just ask him some questions?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, sure. Let me just think of some really quick. And, but afterwards he was teasing me and he was like, yeah, you might have been drooling just a little bit during that.
It's all right.
I'll own that.
We'll edit out the drool and, post-production. That's hilarious. No, that's really cool. And I've been seeing him pop up around some other podcasts in the industry. So it's great. And I think therapists can learn a lot from his model. Tell therapists about the work you're doing now, about the services you offer to therapists, and how people can get in touch with you. Sure.
So like I said earlier, I've started doing some consulting. I've really tried to actually live Mike's model of clockwork and back myself out of my practice so it can run on its own without me. And for the most part, it does. So that opened up some time that I can do some consulting, mostly focused around, I try to keep it very focused on profit and process. So since they're both kind of intertwined a lot, I do a lot of that. Did you tell me to talk about what I have coming up? I can't remember.
Yes, I'm telling you now. And this will probably air in the next week or 2 weeks at very most, if that helps with your timeline.
Yeah, okay. So in terms of profit first and money, one of the things we do have coming up in next month, actually in October, is a 30-day cleanup month. And so it's me and Joe Sanok and Allison Pigeon. We're going to kind of split up that month and do a 30-day course and try to help people get their finances cleaned up, get a good plan for what's coming up. And so that's something that we have going on. Have a mastermind group getting ready to start in a couple of weeks. And so that's really exciting. It's called $1 Million Mastermind, and it's through Practice of the Practice. And we're really going to focus in on systems and processes and profit over the next 12 months. Very intense. It's a 3-week we meet 3 times a week type thing. People get to come to Kentucky. They get to go to Slowdown School, so they got a lot of options there. We have a Meet You in Kentucky event. This will be the first one we're going to do. It's a 2.5-day thing, and people are going to come into Kentucky, and we're going to do some really focused work on building out a dashboard for your practice, getting your systems and your processes implemented, and leaving with a plan. So that's coming up November the 13th and 14th. So we're really excited about that. And you actually just had a new website built out.
You got a fancy new website.
I know. I'm still kind of learning it. It's a little challenging for me. I haven't quite figured out the platform yet. But it is just consult with Kasey.com. And I don't think I have every event on there yet, but I have most of the things that I just talked about. They're listed up there in the event section.
Excellent. And we'll put all those links in the show notes for people listening. Well, Kasey, you're a real hoot and a very knowledgeable business person. So I appreciate you a lot. And I'm going to look forward to the next one. We're going to have to do it real soon.
Sure. Sounds good.
See you soon.
See ya.
All right, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Do me a favor, click that subscribe button below and stay tuned for the next video coming up.